All right. Welcome, welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here and on this kind of dreary November day. And while we're waiting for everybody to get in here, I will use the opportunity to my disclaimer today as I'm a little under the weather. I've got kind of a head cold. So if you notice, I've got a little watery eyes or uh, hopefully not too runny of a nose. If you see me disappear for a second, it's probably because I'm blowing my nose. Nothing major. I think this is like a 4 day cold. It came on Monday, and hopefully it'll be gone by tomorrow. But that's my disclaimer. If I either sound a little bit different, or you can tell I'm I'm dealing with something, that's it. But nothing, no illness could keep me away from the very important topic of estate planning, right? I say that facetiously, not because estate planning is unimportant. Of course, it's very important. That's true. It's just not the sexiest topic to go over. Very impactful, just not flashy. But that often is where the real difference can be made. If you've been around long enough, you know that having a plan for your estate, and we'll get I'll do my bit on why I think that's a loaded term and I don't like it. But having your plan ready for your estate is incredibly important. So I'm so glad you're all here, and we're going to cover a lot today. And my other disclaimer is in no way will we be able to cover every angle of estate planning. Not even close. I mean, we could take one of the topics we're going to talk about today, and that could be its own hour. But hopefully, what today will do is jog some thoughts to say, ooh, that's something I haven't thought about. Ooh, that's something I haven't thought enough about. Um, to get you in the mindset of, okay, here are the incremental steps we need to take in order to get ourselves in a better position for what's going to happen when we're gone. That is the crux of an estate plan. And starting it off, just a statistic for you, only 24% of Americans have a will, period. And that number has declined. Now, caveat, it is not for every single person, either on this call maybe, or certainly out there in the world, it is not always the most vital thing that you have a will. Okay. And that sounds very counterintuitive, especially coming from somebody like me. I'm not telling you not to get a will. I would need to know a little bit more. But I've sat, for example, in meetings with people we work with and an attorney where the attorney said, "You've kind of got things," he's saying to the client, "You've kind of got these things set up well without a will. You may not even need one." And they're always very surprised by that. I think mostly because it's like, so you don't want us to pay you for a will? But it's genuine advice. So by no means do I think everybody needs a will. That said, if you ask me which is the bigger group, people who have one but don't need it, and people who don't have one but really do need it, that group, the people who don't have it but do need it, is much larger, right? So if you don't have a will, or if your will is out of date, which is better than not having one, most likely, but in a lot of ways it could be very bad. Those are things you want to start thinking about. And you might say, hey, I don't have a very complicated estate, right? I don't have, maybe you don't even have kids, for example. Yeah, it's possible you might not need a will, but we should at least still think about it. Okay, so if yours is out of date or you don't have one, you need to think about whether a will should be in place. I'll tell you personally, I have a will. My wife has a will. We did it a couple years ago after my first daughter was born. Um, and kind of the same thing. It was like, well, we only have now I have two girls, but I only had one at that point. So it was like we have a very uncomplicated situation. All our assets will go for the benefit of our daughter, both my wife and I, first to each other, then to our daughter. Like we were the kind of the classic example of, well, we might not even really need a will. But I was like, no, we're gonna do this because I want it written down who, if something happens to me and my wife, will be the guardian of our daughters and the successor, and just having that stuff in writing is incredibly important. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit here. This is what, by the way, can happen if you don't have a will or a trust. There's no official document that says what should happen. Now, you still have beneficiaries on your accounts. I'll cover what that means and how that works. But there's no official document that really spells it out. The worst case scenario, obviously, the one that you may have heard of before, or hopefully haven't, but maybe have even lived through, is what if people disagree? What if it's not clear cut what should happen to this item or that item, and you never wrote a will, and now people disagree about it? Well, that can get messy very, very fast. Um, and we also need to think about not just what happens after you're gone, but what happens if you have a sudden medical event and you're not in a position to be able to make decisions for yourself, whether that's healthcare decisions or financial, legal, life decisions. Though that is a scenario that is underprepared for as well. So estate planning is a gift to your family. Let me use this slide as a moment to talk about the word estate in estate planning. And those of you who have maybe heard me talk about this before have heard this before. It is a pet peeve of mine that estate planning is sort of the term of art here. And what I mean by that is I think that turns a lot of people off because you see the word estate and you're like, well, I don't have an estate like some fancy, aristocrat. I have stuff. I have a house. I have some assets. I have some money. But I don't have an estate. That sounds very fancy, not for me. And everybody has an estate, just by definition. Estate is just what you're leaving behind, what you haven't spent, what you haven't sold before you pass away. And that's why it's important for everybody to do the planning. However, I understand that term sort of puts this barrier up to get that conversation started. You don't feel like it's for you. Maybe you do, maybe because you're on this call, but I find that to be true in a lot of cases. It feels a little overwhelming. So we're here to make it less overwhelming. And believe me, I'm not even an estate planning attorney, but I have estate stuff one way or another come across my desk every single week. Okay. So that's how important it is. You've probably dealt with this with someone in your life, maybe not your parents, but maybe your parents. And by the way, all it takes is one sort of bad experience with cleaning up after a loved one after they've passed away for you to get real serious about this for doing it yourself. Because it is not a fun process to go and clean up after someone who did not take the time to get organized or put a plan in place. And, for whoever's going to do that for you, a great gift to them is making things simple and easy. So here are some common problems, obviously. The big one is just there's no directives. There's no, instructions written by you. So everybody's just kind of making their best guess as what you would want, or worst case scenario, what they want now that you're not here to stand in their way. That's obviously when people start fighting about stuff. And the benefits are, I think the biggest benefit, other than you making sure what happens is what you want to happen, is that it makes it easy for the people who are cleaning up after you to just do it and be done. And they don't have to stress over it. They don't have to fight over it. It was all laid out plainly and simply by you for their benefit. So let's get into some more specifics here. Actually, last slide before we do that. One of the things that is very often overlooked in my conversations I have, and I get it because you think of me as the financial guy, right? But it's the intangible things that you want to pass on, your values, your heritage, things that you want to pass on to the next generation, life experiences. This is what it was like here, then, and here's why I think I want you to know this. There are ways to pass that stuff on to. Obviously, the best way is to do this while you're still alive and build those relationships and communicate that. But that's a thing you can think about doing after you're gone as well. And don't overlook that part of it. So, generational planning, you'll sometimes hear it called as well, is a two-phase process that expands your estate planning's reach and helps you plan your two phases, meaning assets and those intangible things. So, what are our objectives here? The first objective is to pass on the tangible wealth you have in the best way possible, both in terms of what you want to have happen and in terms of what's going to be best for the people or organizations inheriting it. And that's a very key piece of the conversation, right? Because it might not be a good idea to just send all the money down the line with no stipulations or guardrails, if they should be so lucky to inherit it in the first place. And then the second objective is values, history, legacy on the intangible side. So, what should you think about in terms of, I'm going to move out of the way here so you can read the slide. But what should you think about for all these different groups? I'm going to get a little more concrete here rather than conceptual. Most people, and not everybody, and there are plenty of reasons why you may not do it this way, but most people who have a spouse generally make their spouse the inheritor of their entire estate. You think of yourself as a unit. When the first one goes, the second one will retain everything. And you should know that most of the inheritance rules and laws are more friendly to a spouse to inherit assets. I won't get into all the different ways, but for example, many of you have or had deferred comp at some point, or a retirement account from work, even besides deferred comp. And if a spouse inherits that account one day, basically, I'm oversimplifying, but basically what happens is they get that account, their name goes on the top, and it's like it was theirs all along. They don't have any special or weird rules to follow. They follow the same rules as if it had been their account the whole time. Very clean and easy. If a non-spouse, so that could be a child, that could be a grandchild, that could be a friend, or organization is even a little bit different from that. But if a non-spouse inherits it, now there are more specific rules about what needs to happen with that account. There are timelines that need to be followed. There are required distributions. So again, without getting way too technical on that one item, it gets more complicated the more distant the person who's inheriting it is from you, essentially. And if any of you have ever talked with me about this, and if you haven't, by the way, this is absolutely something I can help you get started with in terms of, hey, Anthony, what would you do in my situation? I don't have this, I don't have that, I do have this, I do have that. Where should I go next? I'm very happy to break that down for you. One of the first questions I will ask you if we have that conversation is, okay, who do you want to leave the money to? Right? That's maybe the very first question. Anything that's left over, where do you want it to go? And say, okay, I want it to go to my spouse and then I want it to go to my kids. Great. Simple, easy. That's very easy to accomplish. Um, then the next question I'm going to ask you is a little more nuanced. It's, okay, so that all makes sense. Let's say something, not that I want this to happen, but let's say something happens to you and your spouse at the same time. So now the kids are up. They're the next in line, right? Do you feel comfortable with them inheriting everything all at once? Everything you have to give. If something happened to you and your spouse, would you be comfortable if the kids inherited all at once? Now, a lot of times people still say, "Oh, yeah, they're adults, they're great, they're doing fine. Yeah, just make it easy for them." But sometimes the answer to that question is, I'm not sure if that would actually be good for them, right? We work with all kinds of people. I've had people whose kids have substance abuse issues, who are not good with money, are maybe in a more desperate time in their lives in terms of finances, and a quick influx of assets might not be something they could handle psychologically at the moment. I mean, I don't need to speculate on the reasons, but there are situations where you might want some guardrails put in, right? And that means you have to do that deciding beforehand. They're not going to put guardrails on it themselves, and I can't do it for you. We can talk about it, but I can't just do that once you're gone. It's whatever you've decided ahead of time makes or breaks how they inherit it. And by how, I really mean all at once or with some rules or stipulations attached to it. That's really where trusts come in the picture, and we will talk about trusts. Certainly, I mentioned at the beginning, I would encourage everybody to consider a will. It's fine to consider a trust too. There are how should I say this? More people need a will than need a trust. Okay? More people need that baseline will than they do a trust. And we'll get into what trusts are and how they differ from wills here in a second. But this says follow a 6-step plan. I mean, if you're a person who likes to write that stuff down and make steps, that's great. If not, you don't need to think about it as 6 steps. It's just, okay, what do we need to think about here? So incapacity, let's talk about that first. Two important documents, okay? Advanced Directive for Healthcare or Healthcare Directive or Living Will. You'll hear they're all basically trying to do the same thing. And Power of Attorney. Okay, so a healthcare directive is your words about how you want your care to be given to you, especially in the event that you're not able to make decisions for yourself, right? So, for example, you're in a coma, you're on life support. That's the common example everybody thinks about. Okay, you're on life support. I know this isn't fun to think about, but this is unfortunately where estate planning goes. You're on life support. The docs are saying, "Hey, we don't think nothing good is going to happen here." And the kids, for example, or anybody who's in charge of making decisions is like, we're not ready. We can't do it. We can't turn off the life support. And you would have wanted them to, right? That's what you can do with a healthcare directive. And it doesn't have to be that. You can also write in a healthcare directive, no, never turn that stuff off. Like as long as, there's even the sliver of a hope, keep it going. So it's up to you. But having that written down in advance not just makes your care the way you want it. And that's what it seems like at the first. But what does it really do? Again, if you've had to deal with this with a parent, it takes the decision out of the hands of people who are might be having a really emotional tough time with it. For example, your spouse or your kids. And especially if they don't agree. I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. My grandmother passed away years ago now. But when she was about to pass, we were all in the hospital and they were telling us like, yeah, it's going to happen and here's, what we can do, but we're going to keep her comfortable, but there's really, we know where this is going to go. And my dad, it was on my dad's side, is one of five. It's him and four aunts that I have. And they were all talking about it. Like, okay, well, we certainly want to make her comfortable. Everybody can agree on that. But like, should we do this? Because they're saying, well, this could maybe extend things or, little palliative stuff like that without getting into all the details. But there was at one point, like, ooh, my one aunt said, I think we should do this. And the other aunt was like, I think the doc's telling us, the writing's on the wall here. Let's just make this simple. And they ended up being able to come to an agreement. But there are versions of that story where they don't agree and they drag it out and they fight. And, God forbid they even legally fight about it while you're experiencing something. That is the worst case scenario. That is why you do a healthcare directive. They can be very simple, they can be very boilerplate, but it takes the decisions in large part out of the kids' hands who might not agree on what to do. And if you don't have kids, it takes it out of whoever you'd have theirs hands. I'm going to default to talking about kids, but I fully understand not everybody has kids. Totally fine. This all still applies. Power of attorney. This is one of the less understood pieces of the puzzle. And frankly, I think almost everybody should have a power of attorney. I get it if you're like, there's nobody I trust that much, Anthony. I'm not married. I don't have kids. Like, I don't want to just give it away to somebody. And okay, fair. You know your life better than I do. But I think almost everybody should have a power of attorney. And let me tell you what a power of attorney is. And I think it'll become clear why it's important. So, power of attorney, if you hear just regular power of attorney, they have authority once implemented over your financial and legal matters only. Okay? Now that usually surprises a few people because they're like, wait, I thought I was doing power of attorney so that they could make medical decisions for me. That is different. That's called medical power of attorney, and it only gives them the ability to do medical decisions, not legal and financial ones. Now, of course, you can have someone be both medical and regular power of attorney, so they could have the full scope. But know what you're signing up for, right? In Minnesota, and a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about today is relevant to Minnesota and very likely relevant to most states out there. I'll throw in a little bit of Wisconsin knowledge, but if you're in a different state or you're wondering about a different jurisdiction, we should talk about that because I'm off the cuff most familiar with Minnesota, and then Wisconsin is a close second. So if you're talking about, well, how does this work in Idaho? Well, okay, let me look into that a little bit more just to make sure it works the same way. So disclaimer, but back to the power of attorney. Um, in Minnesota, you can Google short form power of attorney on Google. The first link that comes up should be the Secretary of State's office. I believe it's the Secretary of State's office. It'll be a Minnesota state government website. You can just download the form and you can fill it out yourself. It has to be notarized when you sign it, and the person you're empowering, or people, because it can be multiple people, also have to sign it. They don't have to get their signature notarized, just yours. But then you can do it and it's done. And you, unless you have a very complicated situation, that's probably what's going to work for you. That's what I have, for example. My wife and I are power of attorney for each other at this point. And that is a good strategy, by the way, to do spouses for each other. Because, for example, any retirement account any one of you has can only be titled in one person's name. You can't own it jointly. It's just because of the way the tax code works. Which means that if you call me up and say, hey, my spouse is a client of yours and she's or he's unfortunately going through some stuff and we actually need to take some money out, can you just send us this amount of money? If I don't hear from the literal account over, even though you're married and I know you, that's not enough authorization. You're going to have to show me that you're power of attorney or get the actual account owner on the line. And that's a security thing. Like that's not my choice. It's how the industry works. So getting that in place ahead of time, obviously, is crucial. Now you can get a power of attorney after someone's been incapacitated, but it's way more difficult because right, they're not able to just sign for themselves. So now you're going to have to go potentially to a judge to petition for this because they're not able to do it for themselves. So get that done in advance. I'm not saying you have to. Oops, I didn't mean to go forward. I'm not saying you have to do it today. I'm not, you know what a lot of people do is they get it all filled out, maybe for the kids, and they say, okay, here's power of attorney. By the way, that document that I mentioned has like you can limit their powers, so it's only on this specific item, like the house, for example, but not my financial accounts. You don't have power over that. So you can kind of limit it that way. Generally, I encourage you, if you're going to pick a power of attorney, let them do everything because it's just going to throw hurdles up in front of them. But again, situations vary. But you fill it out, you sign it, you get it notarized, and then you stick it in a drawer. You stick it in a box, and you tell whoever the person is, your kid, whoever, in case of emergency, there's a box on the back of the shelf in my room, in our room, our bedroom, that has a document in it. Sign it, and you're empowered to be power of attorney. Don't worry about it until then. Don't worry about it until the need arises, right? But people do that. And that is kind of the breaking case of emergency thing where it's like they don't need to be power of attorney for 20 years while you're doing fine. They don't need to either worry about that or have that in their heads. But if you need it, then it's there and ready. So that's a strategy that's been employed. And I always have to tell the funny story when I talk about power of attorney that an accountant we work with. I was having a joint meeting with him and another client, and we had just wrapped up, and I think we got talking about power of attorney somehow. And he said, "Yeah, my mom actually just made me power of attorney." And he said, "Mom, do you know what that means?" And she said, "Well, yeah, something happens to me, you can take care of things for me." And he said, "Well, yeah, that is what it means, but." You signed it. It's live right now. That means I could go to a realtor right now and I could sell your house. I could act as you and sell your house. And obviously he's joking. He wasn't going to sell the house out from under his mother. But that is the power that it grants to someone. They are you from a legal and financial perspective. And they can do things that you would do that you would be empowered to do with your own property. Quick aside as well, and then I'll move on because we've got plenty more things to hit here. There is a difference between regular power of attorney and durable power of attorney. Okay. That durable word is the important word because durable means it stays in effect even if you do become incapacitated. A lot of people don't know this. If you go into a coma and you have regular power of attorney, that power goes away for someone. Just regular power of attorney. They need to be a durable power of attorney in order for those powers to remain even after you're incapacitated by something. So very, very key point there. Now, most power of attorneys you're going to do are just going to be durable by default. That's half the reason you're doing them usually. But double check, I guess is the point. So, getting organized. Obviously, anybody, as I mentioned before, anybody who has had to deal with this with a family member knows how important this is. It's not just about getting things from your end and saying, well, this'll, it'll make sense to them when they see it, the kids or whoever. No, get stuff written down. These are where the accounts are. I think if you're a couple, for sure, even with kids, frankly, get a book or a notebook and write down which account is paying the bills, where who's the electric company, who's this, what are the passwords to the computer, where are all the important documents found? Because anybody who's had to deal with that knows that that is a real pain if you have to deal with somebody who has not organized things. And by the way, we have a resource to help you with that. It's called the What If Workbook. Aaron may be able to link it in the chat here, and if you may have seen it before. Aaron will link it in the chat so you can download it. If it doesn't work for you to download, just tell us and we'll email it to you. But it is a long document. Certainly not everything in there is going to apply to you. Thank you, Aaron, for putting that in the chat for everybody. And it is to prime your thinking about these questions and help you get organized. It is not something you send back to us. It's not, you don't have to pay to use it. It's for your benefit. And you can go through it page by page and say, oh, yes, the electric bill gets paid out of this bank account every month, and here's the information, and here's who all our beneficiaries are, and here are the prescriptions I'm taking, and here's who the insurance is through, all that stuff, and where are the passwords? What are the passwords to everything? And I get that, that feels like a very, wow, this is somebody could really steal my identity with all this. Right. Keep it, don't leave it out on the dining room table. Keep it in a safe spot. But that can be not only a good, what's the word? I was going to say test, but it's not really a test. It's a good exercise for you to go through to identify areas where, ooh, we haven't thought about that. Yeah, we should write that down. It's also a guide for whoever's going to be there when you're no longer here to go, okay, let's look through this book. Got it. We had accounts over here, accounts over here. This is how this was set up. It's just a sheet. So please take a look at it. If nothing else, I'm not saying you have to use it. You might be a person who likes to have everything on an Excel spreadsheet. That's great. Make sure somebody knows the password to get it in the computer that has the spreadsheet on it or print it off or something. But this is to help you start thinking about this. So it's a really great resource for that. Make it easy for people. Again, if you've dealt with this on your own, again, another story because we have a million of these. Worked with a client. Actually, the person in question here was the friend of this client, and that's an important detail because it was an older couple. When they came to us, both spouses were still alive. Now they've actually both passed away. They were in their 80s when we first got in contact with them, and both of them were having memory issues. This couple in their 80s. The husband was at a more advanced stage. The wife was on her way there, unfortunately. And they had always done everything completely separately. Okay, the husband had handled the finances. The wife had no interest in that. That was just how they organized their life. Okay, that's how they did it. I'm not here to tell them that's right or wrong. I'm just here to help them. But because they both had memory issues, this friend of the family was taking on the role of power of attorney and helping organize their life. And why was it a friend of the family? Because they had no family left. They had no kids of their own, and they were both only children. They had literally no family. So this friend stepped up, and God bless her. She did an amazing job, and just basically out of the goodness of her heart, but said they're going to need help. I can step up and be the one to help them. And so we started to get things organized, and we quickly found out that the husband in this case, because he was the one doing all the finances, had what I like to think of as coffee cans of money spread out everywhere, and probably literally in coffee cans at their house. I didn't go into their house or anything, but accounts were everywhere. I mean, this guy did not believe in doing anything twice with one institution. right? It was an account over here with this company, and an account over here with this company, and they're the exact same type of account. They could have been combined, but he just didn't believe in that. And, look, that's his choice, but it sure made things a heck of a lot more complicated for their family, for this friend who's the power of attorney for them, who's trying to get this organized. Again, once the husband unfortunately passed away, the wife was still alive, had zero interest or frankly capacity to be able to deal with this. And it's not like things went terribly wrong. I mean, we got there eventually. We got things organized. We got them combined. We made it easier. But oh my gosh, what a process that took way more effort than it needed to. Right? It is possible to simplify things ahead of time. It is possible to combine accounts. It is possible to make things simple and laid out with instructions. Here's where this account is. Here's where this account is. And that is an incredible gift to be giving to the next generation. So consider contingencies. Okay. What if your spouse dies before you? Do you want your assets divided equally among your kids or not? And frankly, you might think right now that, oh, of course, everything will be divided equally. Well, let me give you some scenarios here. Let's say you own a house when you pass away. Do you want your kids, let's say there's multiple, to inherit that house equally? Meaning if there's three, they each inherit a third. Or if there's two, there's 50-50. That can be a little troublesome sometimes. And I'm not saying you can't do it this way. Many people do, and it works out just fine. But start thinking about this. Okay, well, I'm going to make up a scenario. I'll use my family, even though my girls are both under 3 years old. So they have a while before they're going to be thinking about this. But I own a house. I have two girls. Let's say I want them to inherit it 50-50. Well, what if my older daughter has her eyes on the house and says, actually, I think when mom and dad are gone, I might live there. I like that house. I could take it over. It could be mine. I'd like to live there. And the younger daughter, she's saying, I have no interest in living there, and I would just prefer to sell the house because I could use the money. I've already got a house, let's say. Well, now we have a problem. One wants to live there, which means they don't want to sell. One wants to sell it because they want the money. And let's say the older is not in a position to buy out the younger, because obviously that would solve the problem. Now we got a problem because you can't really sell half a house, right? So now they're going to fight over it. I'm painting a little bit of a worst case scenario. But what can we do? What can we do to help prevent that, right? Well, one option is if I know ahead of time that my older daughter it has her eyes on the house, I could say, you know what we're thinking? We're thinking we might leave the house to you and we might leave more money for what's left over to your sister. And that we'll call it even that way. And for some people that works. For other people, the younger sister's going to say, hey, I don't know how much you're going to leave me, but I know that house is going to be worth this amount. So that's not fair. So now you got that problem, right? So I'm throwing these problems at you, not because you necessarily have them, but start thinking about that. What will happen when you're not here? Do you have a kid who you don't feel is ready for your inheritance? And if you have a special needs person, whether it's a child or a friend or anybody you'd like to benefit with assets, we absolutely have to have a conversation. Not an option, in my opinion. We have to have a conversation about how to set things up, especially if, in their special needs, they're receiving some form of government benefits, whether that's Social Security, disability, whatever, and it could be for all different types of conditions or states that they might be in. We have to have a conversation because the way that they inherit something makes or breaks whether they are allowed to stay on government benefits, which is a huge deal. So special needs, if that's in the question in the balance, we have to talk about this more in depth. If it's just, wow, I want to make sure this works for my kids, then you have a lot of leeway to do what you want. I brought up the house example, so this is a good time to insert something many of you may know, but a lot of people don't, I find in my experience, which is, did you know that you can put a beneficiary on your house? So just like your retirement accounts, your deferred comp accounts, you put a beneficiary on them, okay? I'll get to this a little bit later, but let me prime the pump here a little bit. Anything you have a beneficiary on, investment accounts, your house, as I just mentioned, does not go according to your will. It supersedes the will. It goes according to who the beneficiary is. So, for example, I could write in my will, I want everything I own left to my eldest daughter for whatever reason. That's what I've decided. And then my beneficiary on my retirement account says, ooh, I want it split 50-50 with my youngest and my oldest daughter. What will happen? Which one will win? The beneficiary will win. It will go 50-50 because that supersedes the will. It also prevents those assets from going through probate, which probate is essentially the process of settling a will. It's the legal function of settling a will. We'll get to that. But so you can put a beneficiary on your house so that the same process happens. And the way you do that, it's called a transfer on death deed. TOD, transfer on death deed, as in the deed to a house. And you can get that in place if you don't have it by, at least in Minnesota, and I believe it's the same in Wisconsin, going to your county registrar's office. Same place you're filed with your homestead for property taxes, for example. They should be able to help you turn your deed into a transfer on death deed. That can be a great step to just, whether you have a will or not, to just get that done. So you're like, we know what we want to have happen with the house. Let's just get it in writing right now, not just put it in the will, but get this deed done. And if you happen to sell the house, no worries. It obviously just goes away at that point. So you're not like left with any weird contingencies there. So that's a great strategy to consider how or the mechanics of how you want the house to pass on. Obviously, you have to think about, again, the tricky part is who's going to inherit the house and why and how are things going to be even there. Best case scenario, the kids are all on the same page. Yep, we'll inherit the house. Everybody's cool with selling it, or everybody's cool with one of the kids living there and the other one's not, and we'll make it work another way. And that happens a lot. Don't get me wrong. But you got to start thinking about what if this does go wrong? I mean, literally, I've seen cases where kids are fighting over the lawnmower from the house. Not a joke, legally fighting over the lawnmower. Okay? That's not what you want. That's why you want to start thinking about this. By the way, that same beneficiary tool that you can do on your house, you can do that on your bank accounts too. More people know about that, but even still, not everybody does. That one's called payable on death, POD. Just call the bank, say you want to make your accounts payable on death. They'll give you a form to fill out who you want your beneficiaries to be, and you're good. So that means when you're no longer here, they'll just pay out the accounts to the right person. They don't need to. They'll still need to walk in with a death certificate and all that, but it's not going to go through probate then. Okay. Work with somebody like me. Look, obviously, I'm going to say this because I know the work that we do every day. If you haven't had a conversation about this with anybody other than maybe yourself or your spouse, just talk to somebody. Look, I would encourage you to talk to me or Amy on my team. Either one of us, we can give you a lot of the tools to work on this and to start thinking about. But talk with somebody, even if it's not us. I think it's too important to not start talking to a professional about it. We, by the way, offer that. You can just come in and have a meeting with us, and we're happy to just talk about it. Okay? We're not going to charge you for something up front. We're going to look at it and say, okay, here's what we see. Here's where I think you've got good things going on. Here's where you're a little weak. Here's what I'd recommend doing next. And, then we can decide if there's any space for us to help you with that or not. But there's no excuse for not having the conversation. This will be my plug. Here, I'm going to go back one page just because I'm going to talk about wills in a second. I'm literally dealing with this question right now. So a person we work with is inheriting some money from their aunt who passed away. And they are saying, God, the document that this other company sent me is just ridiculous. Like in terms of how complicated it is. And it's like another language to me. Let me put this out there right now. And maybe this is the most important thing you'll take away because this actually affects people on a daily basis. If you or anybody you know or anybody you hear about, or you're at a restaurant, and you hear the next booth talking about it, literally, they're inheriting something and they got this document. Annuities are notorious for this, but frankly, any type of account can get complicated. When you inherit an account, no matter what type of account it is, you're going to get a form in the mail or email, but let's call it the mail, from the company where the money is currently held. Again, more complicated annuity, that the form will be even more complicated. Regular investment account, more simple. But you're going to get a form in the mail, or whoever it is will. And it is going to be what I call a one size fits all form, meaning they've created, every company has this, one form for every possible situation that anybody inheriting money could have. And that sounds great. It sounds like we're saving trees, right? And that's, saving money is probably why they did it, making it simpler. Unfortunately, what that does for you is it means you, and literally this is true, might need to check one box on that form and nothing else. And it might be a 20-page form. And reading through that as somebody who I'm projecting that may not be used to this terminology every day about stretch IRAs and 5-year payouts and annuitization and all, and you're trying to just make sure you're following the rules right, and here's what you want to have happen. It can be like reading a completely different language. Let us help you with that. I am more than happy for you to send me that form. Say, hey, aunt or uncle passed away. I'm helping out the niece and nephew. Can you just tell me which box to check just to send them the money in the easiest way possible? Absolutely. I'm I'm not even necessarily giving advice on it. You may know what you want to do. I'm just translating from the legalese, investment ease jargon into, well, oh, yeah, this is what that box means. And you don't even need to fill out any other box because that's the one you want to do. And literally, I've done this many times. I do this, at least once a month with somebody where I'll take a look at that form and I'll say, oh, yeah, this box you check right here, that'll get you set up. You're following all the rules. Here's what you need to know. And it's a 5-minute conversation. It takes 2 minutes to fill out the form that they had been sitting on for 3 weeks trying to understand, calling the company, trying to get more information, the reps on the phone not being as helpful as they should be. If you ever have that situation, get in touch with us. I don't care if they're a client or not. I don't care if you're a client or not. Let us just help you translate those terminology. Look, and if you want, we can start to talk about advice on what to do with it. But I can at least just tell you what it means to check this box. That's no problem at all. And it's way underutilized by people we work with. I get people who are like, oh, you would do that? For my brother who's inheriting it from whatever. Absolutely. Absolutely. And they don't, again, you don't need to be a client. They don't need, we're just happy to help because I know from personal experience and obviously from doing this job that those forms are kind of a nightmare to read through. And anybody who's had to deal with one knows how weird it is to leave 19 pages blank and only fill out one. It feels like you're doing something wrong. You're worried about it. And usually, look, I'm not saying you can't do it without us. I'm sure you could. We can make it take from an hour down to 5 minutes. Just save yourself that time and call us. So I'm off my soapbox now. Okay. Um, so I alluded to this previously. You don't necessarily need a will. Like I will never pound my fist and say every single person on this call, every single person in the United States needs a will. Not true. I don't believe that. Okay. A lot of people do. A lot of people who don't have them still do. But some estates are simple. Some you just title your house with beneficiaries, like we just talked about. Do the bank accounts, do the investment accounts. Everybody, maybe you've only got one kid, maybe you've got no kids. It's simple. Nobody's going to have even the potential to fight about it. Great. Then you may not need a will. But again, excuse me, working with someone can help illuminate if there are little contingencies. Yeah, but what if this happens? Then you kind of do need a will, right? So anyway, working with somebody like me or an attorney, and by the way, we can recommend you an attorney to work with. We have multiple people we'd recommend. One of the people we recommend is the person I've worked with personally for our will. So I think he's great. We can do joint meetings at our office where they'll come in and we can just have that conversation together. Please, if you're looking for a name, let us know and we can absolutely provide. Oh, yes. And there was, a comment just came through. The state of Minnesota has a will in place for you if you don't have one. And you should know if you have things in mind beyond just like default next of kin inheritance stuff. So in other words, if you're like, well, I always promised my nephew that, I'd leave them the four-wheeler or whatever. The will that's in place by default at the state of Minnesota will not take that into account. Okay. So if you've got something like that, that would be a reason in and of itself to do a will. Okay. If you're like, I'm not just wanting it to flow directly to my next of kin, essentially, because that's how the default wills go. It's spouse, kids, then it's, the closest living family member, essentially. Um, so good point. So, what can you do to start passing things on before you pass on? Okay, and this is a totally overlooked piece of the puzzle here. Hopefully, not overlooked by everybody, but there's ideas on the screen here, and those are all great. Put your recipes together, write down your memories. But I was listening to a podcast the other day. This is not a plug because I haven't used this service, but I heard about it and I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. There's a service out there, and is it like Story Sense or something? I can't even remember the name exactly. But the way it works is they're promoting it for the holidays as a gift. You sign up and you pick a person or pick people. And those people, generally, you're going to pick like your parents or your grandparents or whatever, get an email every week, and it's going to prompt them with a different question. And it's going to say, what was your earliest memory? What was the most important thing? Down to very specific questions. At the end, it compiles it into like a hardcover book, a physical book that gets mailed out to you as the person who signed up for it. Cool idea. Cool idea. Again, you decide if you want to do that for yourself. This is not a plug, but that's the type of thing you can start thinking about, right? And frankly, well, I've been talking about inheritance a lot, okay? And my rule of thumb with inheritance is you can be of one of two schools of thought on it, which is inheritance is really important to me. I want to leave my kids something. I want to help them get set up for their lives with what I leave behind. Great. That's totally fine. The other school of thought is Anthony, they should be so lucky to get some of my money, and I'm going to try to spend my last dollar on my last day. And really, I saved the money. That's what it's for. It's for me. And frankly, that latter is what I encourage people to do because it's right. You did save the money. It is your money. Now, yes, it's a great thing to help out your kids or an organization, even, which I haven't talked too much about yet, but I will. But do things, for example, with your kids or those loved ones while you're still alive. Use the money that they're going to maybe inherit one day to do things with them now. I just had a meeting last week with a family. It was a whole family meeting. The mom and her three kids came in, and we all talked about it. And they said, Mom, you've got all this money sitting here. You've done a great job saving. Like, let's go take that trip as a family we've been talking about. And, you can foot the bill rather than just have more money for us when you die. And I totally agree with that. Obviously, you don't just want to blow your money on that stuff and have nothing left over for yourself, but do things now that you can experience with the people you care about. For grandkids, right? Like, what's more impactful to them? Leaving them thousands of dollars maybe when you pass on, or helping them out, or taking them on a trip, or doing something with them now where they can experience you along with the benefit of that money, right? To me, that's a no-brainer. Do that stuff while you're still here. Talk to somebody like us to make sure you're doing it responsibly, financially speaking, meaning you're not blowing through money just to have fun experiences. You'll still have something left over for yourself. But that's totally what it's all about. Keep your plan updated, monitored. If you get married or divorced, don't forget to change your beneficiary if it was the spouse previously. I've seen that happen before. If your kids are changing or getting married or divorced, or families are changing, take that into account. Oh, do we need to update the will because this change in our family happened? Make sure you're thinking about that stuff. Obviously, new grandchildren are born. Maybe you want to add them specifically as a beneficiary, not just send it to your kids, but carve out a little bit for the grandkids. Totally. Just remember to do that. And obviously, besides those big life changes that can happen, you might just change your mind about what you want to have happen. Nah, I don't think we should do it this way anymore. I want the house, like I said, to go to one kid versus the other because they're the ones who are helping me take care of it right now, and the other kid's not. Doesn't matter what the reason is. That's frankly none of my business what the reason is. But let us help you get it the way you want it, for whatever reason you want it. We can work together to do this. This has an example plan. What I'll tell you here, I don't think you need to make a week by week plan necessarily, but I do think you need to think about this. Now, I've brought up a bunch of different stuff today. And I don't think you need to think about it in terms of, oh my God, next week we got to get all that stuff done. Like we're doing it. I mean, that's great if you can do it that way. I do it. I recommend people do it the eating the elephant method, right? Just one step at a time. We should have time to get all this stuff done, but just do it one step at a time. You don't need to overwhelm yourself by thinking, oh my gosh, there's 18 things we got to do and we got to do them all next week because what if something happens? You've probably got time to kind of take it one step at a time. Don't overwhelm ourselves and just gradually we'll build this thing into a much more solid foundation than maybe you have right now. And again, maybe you're set right now. That's great. We can share resources. So if you need a referral, um, attorneys, accountants. Obviously, we do the financial side pretty well, and those disciplines all overlap, right? Attorney, accountant, financial advisor, they all have a Venn diagram where we meet in the middle. So there's a lot of things, but start with us. I'm the one talking, so I'll say that. But we can absolutely refer you to the professionals that can draw up a will, can do a trust, and I will get to trust here in a minute. I promised I would, but we can refer you to people if we don't do it, and we can hold ourselves accountable. Now, there isn't a slide specifically on here about trust, but we can't talk about estate planning without talking about trust. So I'm going to use this slide to talk about it. So when you hear the word trust, I want you to think of the word control. Okay? A trust is an entity. It's actually an entity that's created, like sort of like a business entity, but obviously different because it's not a business. Trust can own business though. But it's an entity that you create, generally that will become active after you die. So generally a trust you create is not necessarily going to be you could put things in the trust while you're alive, but it's not the rules of it don't take effect until after you die. Now there's a million different kinds of trusts. I don't have time to go into all of them, but generally, there's the goal is I want the trust to inherit my assets when I pass away, and the trust then has rules for the beneficiaries of trusts on how they get the money out, how, when, why. I mean, you could get real creative with it. You can say, I want the family cabin to go into a trust when I die so that I know damn well that none of my kids are going to try to sell it and that it stays in the family for at least another 50 years, let's say. You can do that if you wanted a trust because my grandfather built that cabin with his bare hands. That's going to stay in the family. Nobody's going to sell that for at least 50 years. You could do a trust and that's very simple to do in a trust. You can put stipulations on how your kids inherit money. So you can say, hey, I don't want them to just inherit cash and be able to do whatever they want with it, go out and buy a sports car, for example. I want them to be able to use this money for education, housing. Those are kind of the two most common ones, but really anything. You can be as detailed as you want to be there. So I want them to be able to use this for vacations, housing, going out to eat once a month in my memory. I'll pay for that. The maintenance on the cabin, and their Disney Plus subscription for the grandkids, right? You can be as detailed. Obviously, most people generally focus on the big ticket stuff rather than those day-to-day things, but that's up to you. So, and then you can stipulate, and then how it works is the trust owns the assets that you've passed on, whether it's a house, accounts, whatever, cash. And the trustee, who can be one of your kids themselves or can be a third party, and obviously, if the kids are people you're not necessarily wanting to just empower to kind of make judgment calls, then you do want a third party, and we can help you to help talk that through with you. Um, but the trustee is responsible for operating the trust, the assets within it, for the benefit of the beneficiaries of the trust, which are going to be the people you want this money to benefit. So they're going to be the guardians of, Hey, this trust really says that you can really only tap this money for education and housing, and you're telling me you want to buy, a new Mercedes. That seems like it's not within the scope of what mom and dad wanted. So, unfortunately, I'm going to have to say no, you can't get the money out for that. Right? And that example should help you get a little clarity on what these can be used for, right? You control things even after you're no longer around. Now, there are limits to this. It's not like an all powerful thing. And there are plenty of instances where there are assets you wouldn't want to go to a trust, right? For example, if you don't wouldn't have any problem with your kids just inheriting the money straight out, you probably don't need a trust. It's just going to make their life one step more complicated to get money out of a trust when you didn't really need it in the first place, right? So that's a conversation we should have about whether you need one. But if you've got somebody in the family with special needs or a medical disability, one way or another, that's a really important reason. If you've got property that you've got very strong wishes about, and you don't want other people to make decisions, you want to be the one to make decisions about the long-term future of it, that's a great reason to do it. If your kids or whoever is going to inherit the money, you don't necessarily want them to inherit with no strings attached, that's a great reason to do it. And there are a million other reasons. And we can talk about that. One thing, and then I'm going to wrap up here. One thing that I hear, this is probably the thing I hear, from the average person the most about trust that I think is a little misunderstood is, well, I heard that so and so put their cabin or their house into a trust, and that means if they go into a nursing home, they can't be forced to sell it. And so they were really smart about doing that, weren't they, Anthony? And I'm like, well, it's a little bit more complicated than they made it sound. That is absolutely possible. With an irrevocable trust, which as opposed to a revocable one, cannot be changed once you implement it. And I do mean cannot be changed. In fact, in the news, somewhat, this is within the last like year, Rupert Murdoch, the owner of Fox News, has an irrevocable trust. And he wanted to change it because he didn't like the way that his kids were going to maybe divide up or whatever his empire. And we don't need to get into all those details. But he went to court to say, I need to change this. And the court said, nope, it's irrevocable trust. You wrote this down. There are some very strict exceptions where you could change things, but you don't qualify for those. Sorry, see you later. And he's out of luck. And he's a billionaire. So if he couldn't do it, we're not going to be able to do it either. But if you put something, an asset, in an irrevocable trust, it can be potentially shielded from whether it's creditors or most people worry about the healthcare costs kind of eating up all and forcing them to sell stuff, right? And that's absolutely true. But did you know that the state of Minnesota, who's the governing factor in this, can look back 5 years? So, in other words, if I put something into an irrevocable trust today and I go into a nursing home 4 years from now, it's as good as if I didn't put it in at all. The state can look back 5 years. And there are all sorts of strings that I now have to think about now that it's in an irrevocable trust and not just in my name. So I'm not saying that's whoever you heard that from is wrong. They very well could be right, but it's way more complicated and way more tricky to do well than they make it sound like. Everybody in my experience, who says that is like, what a smart thing I did. I took advantage of the system. And it's like, well, maybe, or maybe you made things a lot more complicated for an uncertain benefit. So that's my little diatribe on doing that. Not that it's a bad thing. You just got to be very careful about it. And again, there's a million different types of trusts. If you're thinking about a trust or you're like, hey, I at least want to have the conversation, Anthony, I'm maybe not even thinking about it, but just what do you think? Absolutely. Just set up a time with us. We'll go through it together. It's a straightforward conversation to have. So it's not hard to do any of this. What the hardest step for a lot of people is just getting started. We covered a lot today. If you take nothing else away from this, then the two things I want you to take away are: one, get organized, and that what if workbook can help with that. Two, if you know somebody or if you are inheriting something and you have a question about those forms, just let us help you with it. It's going to save you an hour of time, frankly, from reading through it. I can't speak for everybody. Maybe you can read it really well too, and that's great. But let us help save you time. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week and a happy holidays as we're coming up on Thanksgiving all of a sudden here. It's unbelievable how quickly that's going. So, let us know if anything comes up, and we will see you next month for our end of the year event. Thanks, everybody.